Or what king, going to make war against another king, sitteth not down first, and consulteth whether he be able with 10,000 to meet him that cometh against him with 20,000? Luke 14:31. It only took Donald Trump 1 year to show the world the depth of his malignant narcissism, total servitude to Benjamin Netanyahu, and unfitness for office. This is not about whether people were justified in supporting Trump over Kamala Harris in the presidential elections in November of 2024. After a candidate, any candidate, is elected president, the election is over, and governance begins. The problem with both Republicans and Democrats is that because they voted for their respective candidates, they feel some kind of holy compulsion to support that candidate, then president, for the next 4 years, regardless of how unconstitutional, illegal, or immoral his actions and policies are. The presidential election of 2024 is over. It's time to quit justifying Trump's illegal, even maniacal actions by glibly saying, "Should I have voted for Harris?" That's not the right question. The right question is, will I sit back and say nothing while the candidate I voted for uses the office of president for his own personal profit, routinely violates and mocks the U.S. Constitution, along with the moral laws of God, becomes a war criminal, in the strict legal definition, by waging an illegal war of aggression, and thus commits mass murder against a nation that posed zero imminent threat to the safety and security of the United States? Since Donald Trump became president a little over 13 months ago, the financial wealth of his family has grown by over $4 billion. Without a doubt, this is the most egregious violation of the Emoluments Clause of the Constitution in U.S. history. Trump has publicly mocked the rule of law, international law, Geneva Conventions, Nuremberg Declarations, etc., by boasting that as president he can do anything he wants to do, and he can attack any nation he wants to attack. The worst problem with saying those things is Trump really believes it. His flagrant war of aggression against Iran proves it. Donald Trump turned the United States into a rogue terrorist state, a criminal war crime state. To find the most recent historical precedent to Trump's illegal war of aggression against Iran, one must go back to the fellow from Vienna with the little mustache. Yes, what Trump did was that draconian. Here is how the Nuremberg court defined war of aggression as the greatest crime against humanity and the severest crime a nation can commit. The tribunal now turns to the consideration of the crimes against peace charged in the indictment. Count 1 of the indictment charges the defendants with conspiring or having a common plan to commit crimes against peace. Count 2 of the indictment charges the defendants with committing specific crimes against peace by planning, preparing, initiating, and waging wars of aggression against a number of other states. It will be convenient to consider the question of the existence of a 25 common plan and the question of aggressive war together, and to deal later in this judgment with the question of the individual responsibility of the defendants. The charges in the indictment that the defendants planned and waged aggressive wars are charges of the utmost gravity. War is essentially an evil thing. Its consequences are not confined to the belligerent states alone, but affect the whole world. To initiate a war of aggression, therefore, is not only an international crime, it is the supreme international crime, differing only from other war crimes in that it contains within itself the accumulated evil of the whole. Trump is guilty as charged, and so is Pete Hegseth. Hegseth, specifically, is guilty of the mass murder of over 170 innocent little elementary school girls by deliberately targeting the school with Tomahawk missiles. In an interview with Judge Andrew Napolitano, former U.S. Marine Corps intelligence officer Scott Ritter chronicles the degree of guilt that now rests on the head of Pete Hegseth. Napolitano: if you take the video of the missile hitting the school and slow it down, you'll see it's a Tomahawk. How could it possibly have been done by Iran? Who could have given him that information? On what could he have based it? Ritter: well, first of all, the Tomahawk that you see is the second strike, the double tap. This came after 4 Tomahawks struck this facility. Napolitano, 4. Ritter. It's a larger facility. We hit 4 targets there, the initial strike. 2 warehouses in the left hand. I don't know the orientation, but if you look at the photograph, the left-hand side, 2 warehouses that were empty because there was no smoke, no secondary explosions. We struck a main hospital building. I'll get to that in a second. Smoke came out of that, so the targeteers assumed that we had achieved the desired effects there. And then we struck another facility about the same size as the warehouses in the upper right-hand corner. This happened to be the school, the secondary school for girls aged 6 to 12. We struck that facility, but there was a 5th cruise missile. These are Tomahawk Block 4s. The 5th cruise missile was the contingency cruise missile. This is the one that circled over the site, sending imagery back to the destroyer that launched these cruise missiles so the people could evaluate whether or not the desired effects had been achieved and, if not, to restrike. They made a decision that the 2 warehouses were sufficiently struck because you had holes in the roof, no secondary and empty facilities. The hospital, which they didn't believe was a hospital, but it was a hospital, had been struck, smoke coming out, meaning you achieved the results. This is a warhead that has dual capability. It penetrates and then blows up inside. So if you've got a hole in the roof and you've got smoke coming out, it means that you achieved significant damage inside. Then you have the 3rd facility that had been struck, partial collapse, but here they saw people running around. Here they saw people moving in, assembling, people coming in off the streets. And a decision was made that this must be a very important site, so they sent the cruise missile in to strike it. But it didn't just hit with the dual-phase warhead. The Block 4 has the capacity to take unexpended fuel and use it as a fuel-air explosive to create a thermobaric effect. And so this missile went into the building, didn't just explode conventionally, but went in with a thermobaric effect, a deliberate choice made by the targeteers. Now, what had happened, though, is that first missile that hit the school, and the majority of the students survived. There were some that were killed in the initial strike, but the teachers took the survivors and moved them into the prayer hall, which was a part of the facility that remained intact. They called up the parents, most of whom lived locally, and the parents began to arrive to pick up their children. The majority were concentrated in this prayer hall when the decision was made to restrike. This cruise missile came down, penetrated, blew up, and then the thermobaric explosion hit. Listen to how the parents described the condition of their children's bodies. Burned to a crisp. There was nothing left. This was a deliberate action by American planners. We know how many cruise missiles were struck. Each cruise missile had a target put into it. We know that there was a restrike. We know this without any doubt. The President of the United States is either a liar or has been told bad information, and Hegseth knows the truth. Pete Hegseth is a war criminal. This war cannot end with Hegseth still in charge. He must be removed from power and preferably arrested. And let me tell you why. You see, the United States, even though we're not a signatory to the additional protocol of the 1949 Geneva Conventions, the additional protocol of 1977, we adopted them as part of our manual for the law of war, the law of war manual of the Department of Defense. And it requires us to use discretion when striking. We have to determine that there is no civilian target. This is a requirement under the rule of law. I've done targeting and combat. I can tell you we do this. We don't allow artificial intelligence to pick these targets, assign grids to them, and just strike them out of the wind. But that's what we did, because we eliminated the requirement to adhere to the law of war. Pete Hegseth did this. In 2023, Joe Biden's Department of Defense put forward a directive called the Civilian Harm Mitigation and Response Directive. This required the Department of Defense at every level to have a team who looked over every target to determine whether or not this target was a military target or a civilian target. We knew that this facility in 2016 cut off that site. We knew in 2016 that that became an elementary school. We knew this because it was public information. But artificial intelligence doesn't pick up on that. Artificial intelligence was simply told within this compound to find buildings of a sufficient size that could be used to hide cruise missiles or drones or anything like that. So we were doing a preemptive strike to take out facilities believed to be capable of. So we hit 2 empty warehouses, we hit a hospital, and we hit a school. Welcome to the targeting. This would have not happened had Pete Hegseth not canceled this directive. Had this directive been in place, we would have a team of targeteers specially trained to go through the intelligence and ensure that we don't strike anything that remotely resembles a civilian target. This was a known knowable. We had the information that it was a school. It's just that artificial intelligence bypassed that. But we took out the human element. We struck it. We murdered these kids. Pete Hegseth murdered these kids. Pete Hegseth is a war criminal. This war cannot end with Pete Hegseth still in charge. He must be removed and held accountable. If this president wants, he can blame it all on Pete, said he was lied to by Pete, whatever. But somebody's head has to roll. We murdered 170 children. It wasn't an accident. It was a deliberate act of war carried out by the United States in violation of our own laws, in violation of international law. And since there is a media blackout in Israel and the United States as to the facts of how Trump and Netanyahu's war is going, we must provide some fact-based information on the situation. In short, Iran is categorically defeating both the U.S. and Israel on the battlefield. In the interview with Scott Ritter, he also gave a military/intelligence assessment of the war in Iran. The bottom line is, the Iranians have not run out of missiles. They're getting ready to move to the next phase of operations pre-planned on their part. Pete Hegseth, the horrific Secretary of War who brought this war to the American people and to this president, has changed his war plan at least 5 times in the last 10 days. It's going to change again. This is a strategic defeat. We've failed our strategic partners in the Gulf Arab states. We've failed our strategic partner Israel. We can't guarantee success. We can't protect them from a defeat. And we've exposed our own weaknesses. Do you think China's really losing any sleep now over American missile defense systems? Do you think Russia's worried about the Golden Dome? So, this is an embarrassment. But perhaps the most humiliating aspect of this is the fact that the American people haven't woken up to the fact that we have now entered the same pages of history with some of the worst regimes in history. We are a war criminal state. We have carried out an illegal war of aggression. We have carried out perfidy. We have assassinated leaders, and we have murdered school children. And this was all based upon the horrific advice provided to this president by Pete Hegseth, a man who removed the rules that prevented America from slipping down the path of unconstrained war crimes and created a situation where we slaughtered 170 school children because we forgot that there's this thing called the law of war. To provide more information, Iran is turning Tel Aviv into another Gaza. Look at the online photos of Tel Aviv today, and the destruction will worsen over the next couple of weeks. Iran is reciprocating the killings of their supreme leader and many of his subordinates. The homes of Ben-Gvir and Benjamin Netanyahu were destroyed. Gvir is either dead or seriously wounded. Netanyahu's brother is dead. And at the time of this writing, Tuesday evening, South African presidential candidate Mehmet Veyfadag said emphatically that Benjamin Netanyahu is dead, as he and Mossad chief David Barnea were meeting together when an Iranian missile destroyed the Mossad headquarters. Barnea is said to be confirmed dead, and Netanyahu is presumed dead. As I said, Israel has a total blackout of news coming out of the Zionist territory, so the facts are being well hidden, which means the destruction and body count is likely much greater than any of us in the West are being told. And the longer this war continues, the more devastating Israel's destruction will be. The Zionist dream of Greater Israel is now dead. This means that Christian Zionist evangelicals are going to have to start figuring out a way to re-explain their dispensationalist prophecy doctrines as the idea of modern Israel conquering the geographical territory belonging to Old Testament kings David and Solomon, Greater Israel, is now over. And if the war goes on too long, John Hagee and Robert Jeffress will have to burn all their books about Israel prophecy altogether because the State of Israel won't exist. No oil not approved by Iran is leaving the Persian Gulf, and none will be leaving until Iran removes the blockades, which means the influence of a lack of oil and other essential products, such as fertilizer and minerals, will have a paralyzing effect on the global economy that none of us have seen in our lifetimes. Trump's very foolish and reckless war of aggression against Iran has ignited an international arms race as countries now realize that the only way to protect themselves against a U.S./Israeli attack against them is to possess nuclear weapons, and this will very likely include Iran. One reality much overlooked is the perception of the strength of the U.S. military. As the lone superpower, the intimidation of U.S. military force plays a huge role in shaping international affairs, as most countries are afraid of U.S. military confrontation. Iran is showing the world that the U.S. military has serious weaknesses and shortcomings. An Iranian victory will forever change the way foreign nations look at the United States. Iran has destroyed most of the radars and defensive missiles of both the U.S. and Israel. The supply of American munitions is dangerously low, with reserves being brought to the Middle East from both the European and East Asian theaters. Trump was an idiot to put American military shortcomings on global display. This war has increased the wealth of Russia exponentially. The shortage of oil among the Eurasian nations is forcing them to look to Russia to fill the vacuum. Russia is making bank selling oil around the world. This only makes Russia more powerful economically and militarily. Another erroneous presupposition of the war hawks in Trump's administration was that eliminating the supreme leader would result in the Iranian people insurrecting against the government. Just the opposite occurred. The Iranian people have rallied around the government en masse. For example, have you seen the videos of the Iranian people by the hundreds of thousands marching in the streets of Tehran, shouting victory or death, while U.S. and Israeli bombs were exploding all around them? Think about it. Would you be in the streets of your city shouting victory slogans while enemy bombs were exploding all around you? This illegal attack has stiffened the resolve of the Iranian people like nothing in the world could ever do. The people of Iran will fight this war to the last man. Trump has awakened a sleeping giant in the Persian country. Iran has won this war. Remember that the admirals and generals of the Joint Chiefs of Staff tried to warn Trump that what has happened could happen and urged him to not attack Iran. But the arrogant narcissist Trump chose to listen to the arrogant narcissist Hegseth. The worrisome part to me is, rather than admitting defeat and being willing to come to equitable terms in sincere and honest negotiations, which neither Israel nor the U.S. have done to date, will one or both countries launch a nuclear weapon or weapons against Iran? The Machiavellian makeup, malignant narcissism, and mental madness of both Trump and Netanyahu, if he is still alive, make the unthinkable possible. When the U.S. dropped those atomic bombs on Japan in 1945, we were the only country in the world to have such weapons. That's not the case today, as everyone knows. In fact, the U.S. is not even the largest holder of nuclear warheads. That ignoble distinction belongs to Russia. But at that level, it doesn't really matter, does it? No one will win a global nuclear war, which is what is sure to follow if Israel or the U.S. launches a nuke against Iran. It would also help tremendously if Christian evangelicals would stop praising Trump's arrogance and bullyism and start doing what Christians should be doing, pushing and praying our president and Congress toward peace. But sadly, that cannot happen, as long as evangelicals are filled with the spirit of hatred and war, emanating from the spirit of hatred and war within Zionism.